Now, shares lost ground today as the US fiscal impasse continued and China's trade data disappointed investors. The benchmark S&P ASX 200 index closed down 0.4% at 5,207. Let's get some analysis on what's moving the markets with Michael Knox from RBS Mortgage in Brisbane. And of course, the top mover of our markets is this nincompoopery in the US Congress. Michael Knox, how are you?
Good evening, Peter.
So am I being too harsh in saying nincompoopery in the Congress?
Well, I think a very good economic discussion is being obscured by a very brutal piece of political strategy. Your earlier question was what will happen if we continue with this argument after October the 17th. I think we're very likely to find out. I think what's happening is a replay of what happened with the fiscal cliff, and when we get a resolution to this, it's likely to be a little bit after the 17th, 18th or 19th, and I think that's going to be enough to really scare the markets. Now, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that we've actually got a little bit more time than the 17th, which is what the US Treasury says, and they estimate the actual time is somewhere between, they delightfully say, between October the 22nd and the end of the month, and that incorporates various strategies that the US Treasury can do to extend the period of potential default. Well, what I think is actually happening is as I say, a replica of what happened with the fiscal cliff at the end of last year in the following way. What's normally supposed to happen in the US legislature is that legislation starts like ours, in our legislation, in the House of Representatives, and then it goes forward for the approval of the Senate, and then after the approval of the Senate, it's signed off by the head of state, pretty much the same as our system. But last year, but of course their head of state is an elected head of state, with more power than our head of state. So last year what happened in December, the President, the elected head of state, and the House of Representatives were unable to reach agreement, and so what then happened was that the negotiation was then done by the Senate, and then the bill passed by the Senate was then provided to the House of Representatives at the very, very last moment, in fact later than the last moment, so the House of Representatives had no chance to examine it, and they passed it by an open vote. So on this occasion, what we've had is a disagreement, considerable disagreement, between the House of Representatives and the President. Rather than seriously negotiate, he's knocked back the proposals for agreement of the House of Representatives. Last Wednesday, the House of Representatives said that it would roll forward the debt limit to January, and the White House killed that over the weekend with the intention that the negotiation would then go down to the Senate, and in the end the solution would be imposed upon the House of Representatives after the date, or exactly on the date, in the same way as it was in December. So I think what we've got is we're going to have a very uncertain period towards the end of this week as the Senate imposes its will on the House of Representatives.
Now let's get to the core of the matter. It seems to me that the Republicans, if they didn't have a bunch of loonies in the middle of it called the Tea Party, probably would have got a negotiated settlement to allow, to avoid a shutdown and to allow the debt ceiling to be raised. But John Boehner, who's the leader in the House, He doesn't have control over his Tea Party members, and they just want to reduce debt at all costs. Is this lunacy, given the fragility of the US recovery, is it lunacy to impose debt restrictions on the government now, Michael?
Well, I think, in fact, a pretty reasonable progress towards a long-term budget settlement was in process in August, and that was under the care of John Boehner and Paul Ryan, who's the head of the Budget Committee. And then it was hijacked by a new senator from Texas whose name is Ted Cruz. Not Tom, but Ted. And he decided to hijack the debate in favour of attempting to vote down Obamacare. And that has forced this whole process into default, and it's fundamentally this misjudgment by Ted Cruz which has led to the breakdown of government and the closure of government. And all of this political fracas has obscured what are some really important things that have been said by the Congressional Budget Office. In September, they noted that, well, to put it in Australian terms, as I explained to my friends, in Australia, both sides of politics at least pretend that they're going to balance the budget sometime in the future. But the Congressional Budget Office pointed out that last month that under the current situation, the US budget will not balance in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes or our children's children's lifetimes. The best that's going to happen is the budget deficit, which this year has closed up to around about 4% of GDP, will close in about 2 years to about 2% of GDP. But then, because of the people who are retiring from the workforce and going into the healthcare system, that budget deficit increases, and after 2020, the budget deficit widens inexorably to about 5% of GDP. So the budget is on an unsustainable path, and decisions have to be made about Medicare and Medicaid as they exist in the US, different programs than those things, those names mean in Australia. But those healthcare programs are going up because of an ageing population. That's unsustainable. In the long term, something has to happen about that. It would have been nice if the can had stopped here, Peter. But the problem is it's been obscured by a distraction over a short-term political battle over a whole bunch of other stuff.
But Michael, if this fracas continues and we get a default and the stock market peels off because of it, and the economic growth that we're seeing in the US is curtailed and affected because of it, well, your budget deficits become bigger because of cyclical reasons. So they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't.
Well, I actually think that we will get a solution sometime between the 17th of October and before the CBO date of the 22nd of October, and we won't go into default. I went to a presentation by the macroeconomics group of the International Monetary Fund on what would happen if the US debt ceiling wasn't renewed. And what they said was that very, very suddenly the US has to balance its budget, which means that you have a fiscal contraction of this year a bit over 3% of GDP, suddenly depressing the US economy in recession. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be an agreement, but it's going to be an agreement probably after the 17th, and it's going to be after the style of what happened with the fiscal cliff in January, that it's going to be an agreement within the Senate that's going to be imposed on the House of Representatives, which the House of Representatives and the Republicans in it will find a rather humiliating experience.
Okay, just put your crystal ball for the market in front of you and tell me if there is no solution by October 17, let's say Friday our time, do you reckon the stock market will be very nervous and will sell off?
I do think the market will be very nervous and sell off towards the end of this week. Yes, I think, as I may have said before, I think that the rally early last week was a result of premature extrapolation. I think the problem is much tougher, and that I think we've got a tough week still in front of us. To me, we'll have to. It will take this because of the second shakeout. We're probably going to get this week. It'll take a little bit longer for confidence to return, and I don't think we're going to get any real kick in this market until sometime in November.
Okay, mate. Well, I wish you'd said the opposite. I wish you'd said there will be a solution before October 17 and the market will not be affected. But hey, you're here to tell us the truth. Thanks for joining us on the program, mate.
Thank you, Peter.
So the debt ceiling deadline for financial markets comes up on Thursday US time, and so really it will be felt here on Friday. And though there's no actual US government debt payment due until the end of the month, if Congress is still in gridlock, markets will head south big time. This will rattle the windows and walls of stock markets, global banks and related financial markets. I hate my wealth being dependent on a US Congress where the Republicans have been derailed by the ultra-conservative and ultra-dumb Tea Party group. The Republicans are blaming Barack Obama for the deadlock, but it's the Republican leader John Boehner's inability to rein in his Tea Party team that is really stopping a compromise. My view is that the big end of town has to be threatening the Republicans, but the Tea Party mob love taking on the establishment. I just hope they can be bullied into seeing good sense before Friday. On that subject, my older son Marty was married a couple of days after Lehman Brothers failed, and I remember this because Sky wanted me to host a show as stock markets tumbled, but Maureen, my wife, had threatened me that there would be no media over that important weekend, and I was on a promise. Ominously, my youngest son, Alex, gets married to Renee Carl next Saturday in Melbourne. Once again, I'm on a no media promise, and so I'm praying that history does not repeat itself with a tumbling stock market. So it gets down to the Congress between now and Friday. I hope on Friday morning I can honestly say, albeit with a tinge of scepticism, God bless America.